Israel Vazquez lost his right eye. Not metaphorically, not as a figure of speech describing a career that faded or a body that aged the way every fighter's body eventually does. He lost the actual organ, removed in 2014 and replaced with a prosthesis, the final consequence of damage that had been accumulating across 3 fights against one man between 2007 and 2010. Vazquez died on December 3, 2024, at 46 years old, from cancer. 3-time world champion, 44 wins, 5 losses, 32 knockouts, a professional career that began at 17 years old in 1995 and ran for 15 years before it finally ended. The Mexican fighter they called El Magnifico, a nickname that captured both the brilliance of his boxing and eventually the magnitude of what the sport took from him in return. World Boxing Council President Mauricio Sulaiman called him a champion whose footprint on the sport would last forever, offering condolences to his wife Laura and his children in the days after his passing. But ask anyone who watched Israel Vazquez's career unfold in real time, and the conversation moves inevitably toward Rafael Marquez, toward 3 specific nights out of 4 total fights between them, spanning 2007 to 2010, that took a complete, devastating, and ultimately permanent toll on Vazquez's body. These are the 3 fights that destroyed his life. Not his career alone, his actual physical life, the eye he lived the remainder of his existence without, the vision that medical science could never fully restore, no matter how many times the surgeons tried. Fight number 1, March 3, 2007. The beginning of everything, the Home Depot Center, Carson, California. March 3, 2007. Israel Vazquez defended his WBC super bantamweight title against Rafael Marquez, the number 1 ranked contender in the division and the younger brother of Juan Manuel Marquez, already one of the most respected names in Mexican boxing. Nobody watching that night could have known they were witnessing the opening chapter of what would become one of the most celebrated and most physically destructive rivalries in the sport's history. A rivalry that boxing writers would later place alongside Gotti versus Ward and Morales versus Barrera as one of the defining series of the modern era. Vazquez scored a knockdown in the 3rd round, dropping Marquez with a clean shot that suggested the champion was firmly in control of the fight. But the contest had already changed direction by then in a way that nobody outside Vazquez's own body could see. He had suffered a broken nose at some point during the exchanges, and as the rounds accumulated, the damage made breathing increasingly difficult. By the 7th round, Vazquez could not continue. He retired on his stool, unable to draw enough air to keep fighting, and Marquez was awarded a 7th-round technical knockout victory. The WBC title changed hands for the first time in the series. This was the fight that established the pattern that would define everything that followed. Vazquez did not lose because Marquez was clearly superior on that given night. He had been competitive, had even hurt Marquez early with a clean knockdown. He lost because his own body failed him under the accumulated pressure of what Marquez's fists were doing to him, an internal collapse rather than a tactical defeat. It was the first fight of 4. The first time Vazquez walked out of a ring against Marquez having given something of himself that he would not fully get back. Nobody understood yet that this was simply the beginning of a much larger and more permanent cost. Fight number 2, August 4, 2007. The redemption that cost him twice. 5 months later, Vazquez and Marquez met again. This time, Vazquez reclaimed his title, knocking out Marquez in the 6th round in a performance that the Ring magazine would name Fight of the Year for 2007. By any conventional measure, this was Vazquez's triumph. The rematch win, the title reclaimed, the redemption story completed in front of the same kind of audience that had watched him fail to finish the first fight. But the cost of that redemption was written across his face by the time the 6th round arrived. Vazquez suffered cuts above both eyes during the fight, damage absorbed in exchange for the knockout that ultimately decided the contest. The fight that the boxing world celebrated as Vazquez's finest hour was simultaneously a fight that left him cut, bleeding, and further along a path of cumulative facial and ocular trauma that nobody was tracking as a single continuous injury at the time. Each fight against Marquez was scored individually, a win here, a loss there, without anyone fully accounting for what the combination was doing to one specific part of Vazquez's body across the entire series. The third round of this fight was named Ring Magazine's Round of the Year. The drama was extraordinary. The toll in hindsight was already becoming impossible to separate from the glory. Fight number 3. March 1st, 2008. The night that took his eye, Carson, California. Once again, the trilogy fight, and by the testimony of everyone who watched it, the single greatest battle of the entire 4-fight series. Vazquez was knocked down in the 4th round, Marquez finding the kind of shot that should have changed the entire complexion of the fight. Vazquez rose. He always rose. He fought back across 12 brutal rounds, eventually winning by split decision in a fight so competitive and so violent that Marquez was ruled down in the 12th round, only because the ropes held him up rather than the canvas. Marquez was docked a point for low blows in round 10. The judges gave Vazquez the victory, the title retained, and the Ring Magazine named it 2008's Fight of the Year. The second time in 2 fights against Marquez that Vazquez's wars had earned that distinction. After the fight, Marquez himself, exhausted and beaten but full of respect, told reporters, "Israel Vazquez is a great fighter. It was the kind of tribute that only comes from a man who has just spent 12 rounds discovering exactly how much another human being can absorb and still keep coming forward." But the victory came with a cost that would define the rest of Vazquez's life. He suffered a severe injury to his right eye during the fight. The specific damage that led to a detached retina, the medical term for what happens when the light-sensitive tissue at the back of the eye separates from the structures that keep it nourished and functional. Vazquez underwent surgery immediately afterward, then a second surgery, then a third. He was sidelined for over 18 months, stripped of his WBC title on December 18, 2008, because the championship could not remain attached to a man who could not defend it while his eye healed. If it was healing at all. Frank Espinoza, Vazquez's longtime handler, said plainly after the third fight that his fighter's career was over. Most observers agreed. The much-fated champion, they believed, should simply retire while he still had something left to protect. Vazquez did not listen. He had 3 more surgeries by the time he was medically cleared to resume training on May 15, 2009. He returned to the ring in October 2009 against Colombian veteran Angel Priolo, struggling early, absorbing significant punishment, before rallying in the 9th round to drop Priolo 3 times and secure a TKO victory. It was not the fighter he had been. Everyone could see that, but it was enough to set up one final chapter that the boxing world, against every piece of medical and competitive logic, still wanted to see. May 22, 2010. Staples Center, Los Angeles. Billed as Once and For All, carried live on Showtime. Vazquez had been stripped of his title due to inactivity, so this final meeting between the 2 Mexican rivals carried no championship stakes. Only the unfinished business of a rivalry that had captivated boxing for 3 years, and the question of which man would finally separate himself from the other after a series tied 1 win apiece. Marquez was a betting favorite of more than 2-1, and he delivered exactly what the odds predicted. He overpowered a badly faded Vazquez, who was fighting with an eye that had never fully recovered from the damage sustained 2 years earlier, and ended the contest with a 3rd-round technical knockout. It was, by the consensus of those who covered the entire series, the least entertaining fight of the 4. Not because the fighters lacked heart, but because Vazquez simply did not have the physical tools left to make it competitive. Marquez's promoter Gary Shaw said after the fight that if he could do anything as a promoter, it would be to promote fights between these 2 men forever. The two bruised champions stood on the podium together, looking at each other with something that went beyond ordinary professional respect. It was the last fight of Israel Vazquez's career. The eye injury, already compromised since the third fight, only worsened from the additional punishment. Multiple surgeries followed in the years after his retirement. By 2016, doctors determined the eye was irreparably damaged, described by WBC President Mauricio Sulaiman simply as dead tissue that could no longer serve any function. In 2014, the eye itself was surgically removed and replaced with a prosthesis. The Vazquez-Marquez series finished even, 2 wins apiece, 4 fights that have been compared to the greatest rivalries in modern boxing history. Gotti versus Ward, Morales versus Barrera. 2 of the 4 fights were named Fight of the Year by the Ring magazine. An extraordinary achievement that speaks to the level of competitive drama both men brought to every single meeting. But the price was specific and permanent, in a way that most celebrated rivalries never require. The damage to Vazquez's right eye, originated in the third fight, was aggravated by everything that followed, and ultimately cost him the organ entirely. He spent years undergoing surgery after surgery, trying to preserve vision that medical science could not restore. Freddie Roach, Vazquez's trainer, spoke after that brutal third fight about the toll it had taken. The kind of toll that does not show up immediately on a scorecard, but accumulates in ways that only become undeniable years later. In retirement, Vazquez became a respected Spanish-language boxing commentator, staying close to the sport that had given him everything and taken something irreplaceable in return. Just weeks before his death from cancer in December 2024, a GoFundMe campaign organized by Oscar Valdez and Top Rank sought to help El Magnifico with the struggles his health had created. Mauricio Sulaiman's tribute after his passing called him a champion who left a special footprint, extending support to his wife Laura and his children during what he called a difficult time for the family. 3 fights, 1 eye. A trilogy that earned 2 Fight of the Year awards and cost Israel Vazquez something no championship belt could ever compensate for. He fought 4 times against Rafael Marquez and walked away from the series tied, respected, and remembered as one of the bravest fighters Mexican boxing ever produced. He also walked away blind in 1 eye, carrying physical damage that no amount of glory could undo, damage that followed him through commentary booths and Spanish-language broadcasts, and finally through a cancer diagnosis that ended his life at 46. That is the story Israel Vazquez lived. Not just a career built on 3 Fight of the Year nominations and 2 Ring magazine awards. A permanent cost, paid across 3 specific nights between 2007 and 2010, that followed him for the rest of his life and ultimately outlasted the man himself. El Magnifico. The fighter who gave everything the sport asked of him, and then kept giving even when the sport had already taken more than it should have asked for in return.